had initially started out as an admission of accidental killing by Sebastian Bendu had now turned into a complex murder inquiry involving more than one person. There was no doubt this was a murder. It was horrendous injuries, and one person couldn't have done this on their own. I found it harrowing trying to picture what Christoph must have thought, trying to understand and comprehend what's happening to him. We need to get justice for Christoph and his family. Wagner and Kocher had likely been involved, so there was clearly a lot of pressure on us to bring them in for questioning so we could start to secure evidence. What we'd established is that Kocher, Bendu and Wagner, they had all left the courts where they'd been living, so we had a lot of trouble trying to find out where they were living, what they'd been doing, and what had happened in the intervening time since they left the court.
We specifically wanted to talk to Manuel Wagner and Dominic Kocher. In talking to neighbours and acquaintances of the trio, it became apparent that we weren't the only ones who had been searching for them since they left. Kocher had borrowed a significant amount of money from local residents and members of the football team that he ran.
Dominic told us he was going to move to Warrington, not far from here. So he said to him, look, I'm a bit short on money to pay towards my deposit. So can you borrow me some money? I said, yeah, how much do you need? And they said, I need £2,000. I thought, yeah, no problem, my friend, I'll give it to you. So I gave him £2,000 like that. No paperwork signed. I thought, you know what, I trust him. We were close, I gave it to him. We played football on Monday, then on a Tuesday he was gone. Thinking, oh, something strange, is he died or something? You know, like, cancer thing, we're like, is he dead? We don't know. Could have held up no one, even Sebastian, Manny.
Manny and Seb moved away with Dom and his family. There was no warning, there was no goodbyes, farewells. It was just, in the middle of the night, they were gone. But we wasn't sure why. We were starting to assume that it was over death chases.
I knew where his house was. I went to his house and he wasn't there. So no one was there, it was just an empty house. And I thought, oh gosh, my money's took as well.
And then we all received letters. Me and Joe received one. I think most people in the football team received one.
A letter sent through to Ellesmere Port, friends of Kocher, said his father-in-law was ill in France and his phone wouldn't be working, and they were going over to France, so you wouldn't be able to get a hold of him. But in truth, they didn't go to France. Kocher, Wagner and Bendu were in rent arrears, and they just upped and left.
It transpired that the three of them were keeping one step ahead of the bailiffs, in that they moved out of Ellesmere Court and ended up in Scotland.
They all moved up en masse to start new lives up there, where again, Kocher was the dominant force who controlled them, their wages, and really how they lived their lives.
They were getting jobs in local hotels and the like. Bendu did land a job. He's working as a pot wash at a local Dumfries restaurant. And one day, Bendu left the rental property up in Scotland and went off the face of the earth. and this is in the May of 2013. And in effect, he's making his way back to Cheshire. This is when he informs the cops that he is responsible for a murder back in 2009 in the Ellesmere Port area. He pretty much walked from Scotland, you know. 2 teams were deployed to Scotland. Wagner was arrested at the rental property, where Dominic Kocher was arrested in a waiting room in a local hospital where he was going for treatment. There was all sorts of rumours about his health, whether he did have cancer, whether he didn't. I don't know what his appointment was for, but he didn't have cancer. The arrests ran smoothly. There was no drama. They were arrested and they were brought back to custody in Cheshire.
I became involved when all 3 of the defendants were in custody, awaiting charge. And it was quite clear that Kocher was in fact the leader, if I can put it that way. The others followed his lead. The difficulty at that stage was there was not enough evidence to charge them with murder. If we just released them, the chances were that they'd leave the country. And so I charged them with preventing the lawful burial of a corpse and assisting an offender on the basis that Bendu was charged with murder. Then they'd assisted an offender, and then it was all stops out for the police to carry out their investigations.
Kocher stuck to the line that he'd told police initially that Christoph had moved abroad. Wagner told police that he believed Christoph was in China because Kocher had told him that he'd spoken to the victim's brother, and he'd confirmed that was the case.
Christoph's brother Noel had received an email which purported to be from Christoph to his brother, saying effectively, don't worry, and that he'd met this girl and that this is the first time he'd had access to the internet.
But we knew that when this email was sent to Noel, these were sent after Christoph's death. So he's not sending the emails. One of the experts that we approached to forensically analyse this email was a linguistics expert. He looked at structure in sentences and languages that Christoph would use in writing in a style, but he also looked at the way that Kocher wrote, spoke, and different dialects of language, and deduced that Kocher sent that email.
As the link between the family and the investigation team, what was particularly difficult for me was to communicate to the family that this email that Noel had received back in 2009 saying he'd left the area and had moved to China was a complete lie. It wasn't Christoph that had sent it.
L'accumulation de choses qu'en fait que moi, dès le début, j'ai dit qu'il y avait quelque chose de pas net dans l'histoire. Mais ça a été dur.
Tu sais, quand il se passe un truc comme ça, il y a des jours tu crois à la version qu'il est parti en Chine. On se raccroche à ce qu'on peut, hein. Donc on disait un jour ou l'autre, moi je disais même pas qu'il allait prendre contact avec nous, je m'attendais un jour à le voir à la porte.
Manuel Wagner told police that he'd come home one day and found Bendo moving a tarpaulin-shaped package, and that Bendo had asked for his help to move it, and him, unaware of what was in the package, thinking that perhaps it was rubbish or some items, had helped move the tarpaulin into the shed. He expressed shock and horror at the fact that a body had been found in the property where he used to live.
But another little piece of information came from a neighbour who lived opposite number 19. And she told us that she was upstairs one day and she was looking across towards 19, and she saw Kocher in the garden of 19 doing manual labour, and she'd never seen Dominic Kocher do any form of labour before.
I can remember Dominic coming out of the house one day with a big rolled up carpet or a bag or something or other, heavy, struggling with it, and the other one that was living there was helping him, and they put it into the shed. For the life of me, I did not know there was a body in it, you know.
Something so small would start to back up the lies that Kocher was telling, and this elderly neighbour remembered it.
When we moved in, we were led to believe Dom was the landlord. When we inquired about the shed, he said that the landlord has things in the shed, so we were unable to use it. We just assumed that it was part of maybe his tenancy agreement on the property, that there were private things in there. Joe had a push bike so he could go to work, and my grandma had suggested, why don't you put the bike in the shed, it'll get rusty or stolen, and we tried to do that on one occasion. You could see our back garden from Dom's place, and Dom came flying from his property across to ours, shouting and swearing in a mixture of English, French and German, and said that we, under no circumstances, were allowed to go near the shed. I couldn't think of anything that would make you react that way, unless it was illegal or shameful, but his warning definitely stayed with us, and we never tried to get in that shed again.
During the course of the interviews of Kocher and Wagner, they were answering the questions that the officers were asking them. Wagner had this undertone of arrogance, but they were two very, very different characters. There was a multitude of evidence that implicated Kocher massively. The purchase of the bricks, the purchase of the cement, his financial history, the money's going through his accounts from the other two. For me, it was the knives that done him. As a result of the investigation and the interviews with Wagner, Bendu and Kocher, and all the further stuff we are finding out, we present to the CPS. The Crown decided to charge Dominic Kocher in connection with the murder of Christophe Bourget.
But we didn't have enough evidence to charge Wagner with murder.
Wagner was charged with assisting an offender and preventing a lawful burial. They thought that was the more fitting charge for Wagner.
But Bendau was being treated for his mental health issues, having been sectioned under the Mental Health Act.
We charged Bendu with murder, even though he said it was self-defense.
He was arguing that he didn't have the capacity or the intent to kill. It was as a result of his mental illness.
When somebody is unwell, in this case mentally unwell, there can be a capacity assessment by a psychiatrist to determine are they well enough to stand trial, meaning will they be able to take in the information, will they be able to understand it, will they be able to give their own testimony.
Those acting for Bendu made an application to have their client not tried at that time, and the judge granted that. So we proceeded against Kocher and Wagner, and we went to trial.
All the evidence was presented, from the purchases to the pathology to what we'd been told, the interviews. The presentation of the injuries at court have to be dealt with in a much more delicate manner. The injury to the side of Christoph's head, it was massive. So it wasn't one blow.
Because of where they lived, family couldn't be at the court, certainly for the duration of those trials. Every day I would speak to Eve and I would go through the events of the day, the evidence backwards and forwards, the arguments.
C'était horrible, quoi. C'était la sauvagerie, hein. C'est du barbare, quoi. C'est tuer quelqu'un à coup de marteau, à coup de couteau. Franchement, c'est affreux, ça.
I've had a few sleepless nights thinking, especially when I give evidence against Dom in court, you know, having dreams of him coming and doing the same to me. Kind of put myself in Christoph's position, but it was me they were doing it to.
The financial side of stuff was a strong part in the case against Dominic Kocher. It's financial gain, and the main controlling feature throughout all of the financial is Dominic Kocher.
If you look at the way that Kocher, in the wake of Christoph's murder, went on to sell all of his possessions, his DVDs, his CDs, his clothes, his car, and the way that he continued to spend using Christoph's bank details and his bank card, it shows that money was the main motive for Kocher.
He was just self-serving. He was off the charts with his lies and the bull that was coming out of him. He'd borrowed money off people and run off. He used to make up various stories about illness. He couldn't lie straight in bed. You just couldn't trust the man.
Over the course of 9 weeks in that first trial, there were some days where my confidence was a bit shaken sometimes that we were going to get the result that we so desperately wanted. Because at the end of the day, we present the evidence, the jury make that decision. But at the end of this trial of Kocher and Wagner, the jury were out for some time deliberating. I was personally quite stressed about it because I was so desperate for the family to get the justice that they deserved.
They convicted Kocher of murder, but acquitted Wagner of the other two offences because we just did not have enough evidence to link him. Once the jury had acquitted, that's it, basically.
Kocher was jailed for life with a minimum of 23 years in prison. Kocher was described in court as dangerous beyond measure, and the court heard that this ferocious killing had been a cold and calculated execution. The judge also referred to the cruel way that Kocher had deliberately sent a false email to the victim's family, giving them false hope that he was okay.
Eve is a retired police officer with over 30 years of service, so he was quite stoic. Aurelie and Noel, I think, were deeply traumatised by what they learned over the course of 9 weeks about what had happened to the brother, the cruelty, the deceit, the lies, the lengthy period of time where they'd had no idea.
J'ai personnellement demandé même à mon père de pas savoir tout dans les détails, juste pour me préserver, entre guillemets, d'une colère ou de... Je n'ai pas réponse à...
Pourtant, je suis pas quelqu'un de violente. Et c'est impressionnant comment un être humain peut se dire au fond pourquoi ils ont fait ça, ils méritent la même chose. Et donc j'ai essayé d'en voir et d'en savoir le moins possible pour essayer de gérer ma colère. Et mais c'était, je n'y croyais pas.
I think there was some measure of justice delivered to the family, and I think they at least knew what had happened.
Bendo stood trial charged with murder in May 2014.
He was arguing that he had diminished responsibility because of paranoid schizophrenia, and we very much as a team felt, no, he committed this murder as knowingly as Kocher had.
We had psychiatric evidence to show that he was perfectly fit for trial.
2 psychiatrists told the court that there was no evidence he was in fact suffering from delusions at the time of Christoph's death.
Retrospectively, we are looking at whether they were actively psychotic at the time of the offence. And what you can look at, witness testimony, text messages, whether they were in work, what was happening in their life. And if all of those things they were able to do and they were appearing stable, then it suggests that they may not be being truthful about the delusions they were having in relation to the offence.
At his trial, Bendo changed his story completely from the account that he'd initially given police that he'd acted alone and that it was in self-defence. Bendo said that he was effectively indoctrinated by Kocher to carry out the killing.
Kocher had invented this fantastical story that Christophe Bourgie was a clear and present danger to Kocher and his family and his children, and that they needed to get rid of Christophe, and that was the only option.
Kocher was very inventive with the stories that he'd spin to the other two. Bendo relayed saying that Kocher had told him that Christophe was actually a spy for the Americans. Where that come from, I've got no idea. He told them that Christophe was planning to assault Kocher's daughter, which is total nonsense.
He was drip-feeding information to make them mistrust Christophe and therefore do what he wanted them to do. He filled them with reasons why this man deserved to die.
Bendo clearly implicated all three of them in being responsible for Christophe's death.
And it had been him, Kocher and Wagner who had carried out the murder together.
I don't know how long the jury were out, but they came back with a verdict of guilty.
He was jailed for life for a minimum of 14 years in prison. His defence of diminished responsibility was rejected by the jury. It was accepted that he had played a lesser role in these events at Kocher, and that Kocher was no doubt the ringleader and that he was under his influence.
When we got to the end of the trial with Bendo and Aurélie and her father were there, it was clear that the evidence pointed to three people being involved in this murder. The look on Aurélie's face as I'm translating the judge's comments, commenting on this three people being involved, and she looked at me and she said to me in French, "So Wagner gets away with it."
J'avais dit c'est pas normal, il faut faire quelque chose. Parce qu'ils étaient 3, 2 condamnés, mais lui non. Pourquoi? Il a commis une faute qui est impardonnable et il doit pas s'échapper comme ça et il ne pouvait pas rester libre.
Wagner was responsible as well, but had ultimately walked away scot-free and was out on the streets.
The judge who was summing up even said in his closing speech that there was 3 knives, 3 sets of overshoes, clearly 3 people involved, and I was raging, to tell you the truth. I was stunned.
All the officers on the teams went on to other cases, but we had put our all into this. It kind of left a gap of, unfinished business. What could we do about it? Is there any possible way we could get to Wagner? And everybody said, no, he's had his day in court. Walk away, move on.
But I just couldn't let it go.
Wagner had likely been involved in this murder, so we then started to try and gather evidence to support that theory. We started to look at Manuel Wagner's background.
Wagner had had a difficult childhood. His mother had left him. He'd gone to live with Kocher's mother at one point, which led to them referring to each other as brothers. He was a lot younger than the other men, and it seemed very much he was under the control of Kocher, who was someone he looked up to and was eager to please.
Manny took a liking to me, which made things a little bit awkward. Manny would knock on the door when he knew that Joe wasn't there and try and show me his new sound equipment or something he'd made on the computer, and he tried to lock me in on one of the days, but I managed to run out and lock myself in my room and then wait till Joe got home. I was too scared to even go to the bathroom. It was scary. It was really scary.
I think since that day we kind of just avoided each other, didn't we?
Yeah. After that, Manny would start playing music really loud, obnoxiously slamming doors and just yelling to himself when there was no one there.
There was times where he definitely seemed the most unbalanced out of all, and he was going wayward, more and more wayward. Every year we'd have a bonfire night on the field, and he would be there enjoying the fireworks, but the last year before they moved away, we had the children round the bonfire, and he was throwing all sorts of gas canisters and anything what was just exploding on the fire. Manny's reckless behaviour that night, we felt it was putting the kids at danger. That was the last night we ever had a bonfire.
To all intents and purposes, it appeared that this case was over with the conclusion of the trials in 2014. Wagner had been acquitted of his lesser role of helping to dispose unlawfully of a body and assisting an offender.
Reality was, the officers in the case were not content to leave it at that.
Wagner was never charged with murder. He was only ever charged with preventing the lawful burial of Christophe Bourget, and he was acquitted.
There was a lot of scepticism, I think, that we would find sufficient evidence there to persuade the CPS to consider a charge against Wagner. This was about securing additional evidence, finding more answers that we didn't have, and we conducted an exhaustive investigation the first time round.
We needed definite evidence that Wagner was involved, and the only way we could get that evidence was from Sebastian.
The decision was made that we would revisit Sebastian Bendu.
We went back, and over the course of 4 days, we interviewed Bendu at length, because we're only going to get one chance to do this. We've got to get this right. Bendu then started to give us key information that we were unaware of from the first investigations.
I'm sure that even Sebastian Bendu realised that it wasn't right for Wagner to be on the outside when the other two were on the in.
And all of the bits that we thought had happened, that we had no admissions for, he confirmed one after the other, and all the pieces of that puzzle were falling into place.
And that's where we found out about the kill room. The kitchen that was just a normal domestic kitchen had been transformed into the kill room. On the 23rd of April 2009, when the three of them attack and brutally murder Christophe Bourget.
Bendu described in detail how the murder took place, in terms of the polythene being laid out to avoid blood everywhere.
They had overshoes on, they had latex gloves. All of that was clearly designed to minimise the risk of evidence leaving any forensic trace.
All three of them, under Koch's instruction, were going to lure Christophe into the kitchen on the pretense that they were doing a spring clean.
They prepared the weapons they would use, and Christophe was then called down to the kitchen, unknowing that he was being called down to his death.
All three of them were armed with knives, and Wagner had a hammer.
They attacked him as soon as he came down and into the kitchen.
So they all had to go at Christophe with a knife when he was on the floor, until the hammer blows came in.
According to Bendu, Wagner brought in the hammer with him. That was not part of the original plan.
Wagner had struck Christophe in the head with a hammer and went on to hit him a further 7 to 8 times.
Christophe's skull was crushed in. His head injuries were horrific.
Manuel Wagner was the most willing participant of all. It was he who brought the hammer to the scene. He was the one who struck the first blow. It was he who fractured Christoph's skull, and that blunt force trauma led to his death. Bendow said that after the killing, they covered up Christoph's body in the tarpaulin. They then disposed of the body by carrying it into the outhouse in the backyard and by building a small brick wall and then covering it with 3 layers of cement.
It just looked like another step at the back. You would never have guessed unless you knew.
One of the things we've discovered is that after they committed this murder and buried the victim in the grave, the 3 of them went for lunch.
There was not enough evidence at that point to charge Manuel Wagner with murder. But Sebastian had told us an awful lot more that we didn't know.
Bendu disclosed to us that when it's his turn with the hammer, he's drawn it back and directed towards Christoph's head, but he's missed. And he has hit the kitchen work surfaces with the claw end of the hammer.
And as Bendu gets the hammer back out in a jerking motion, it's cracked Wagner on the side of the face.
And we certainly didn't know about Wagner's facial injuries. So when I go back into the kitchen, lo and behold, there are 2 really small dents in the kitchen work surface. As you can imagine, in an investigation like this, the amount of physical exhibits to paperwork exhibits is colossal. There was over 7,000 at one stage, and then that number just kept going up and up and up. We had a lot of stuff from Facebook and pictures, and what we're trying to do is find if we got anything in the time frame with Manny Wagner with an injury to his face. It was a long shot, but lo and behold, the DC who's looking at the photographs finds a picture of Wagner with a bruise on his face, which fits in time frame, location, and the nature and size of the bruises to what Sebastian Bendu told us.
We had a forensic expert look at that injury to confirm it was an injury consistent with bruising following a blow to the side of his face.
We were always pushing this rule of 3. The 3 knives, the 3 pairs of overshoes. Them operating as a 3. And obviously Bendu being better and able to testify, it put us in a much stronger position in relation to Manny Wagner.
We now had evidence that he'd committed murder, and therefore he could be charged.
We locate him in a flat in Liverpool. I arrest him for Christoph's murder. He never ever thought that he would ever get charged. He had a particular arrogance about him, bit of a know-it-all, always thought he was right.
I suppose one of the highlights of my career was ringing up the family and telling them we have arrested, charged and remanded Wagner for murder.
Oui, en fait, c'était très bien de pouvoir savoir qu'il allait être poursuivi. Parce que je pense que ça aurait été très difficile de continuer notre vie, tout simplement, en sachant que cette personne était encore libre.
J'étais pas satisfait tant que Wagner n'était pas condamné. Pour moi, c'était les 3 qui étaient punis.
Wagner appeared very cold and indifferent when he gave evidence.
Bendu was, in effect, the star witness of that trial. You're either going to believe Sebastian Bendu or you're not. It's that simple. And that type of problematic witness comes with a boatload of problems, as you can imagine.
I remember there being good days where the evidence was really strong, and then there were other days where, the evidence wasn't quite as strong as we'd hoped and anticipated.
Bendu gave evidence saying that Wagner had been part of the plan to murder Christoph and that they planned it together with Kocher.
Christoph having worked his last shift, coming home late that night. They get up that morning, all three of them, knowing they're going to murder him.
He said that Kocher had called Christoph down from his bedroom and that it was Wagner who'd struck the first blow with the hammer as Christoph shouted, "Stop, stop."
This was the graphic detail that Bendu sat there telling us about how that happened step by step. As we're getting these key bits of evidence and information out of Bendu, we discovered an awful piece of the puzzle. The original trial had centred a lot around how the cement had been mixed, and it had created a lot of debate and argument during the trial, but here we were, all these years on, with Bendu confirming that they'd ordered an electric cement mixer. That information was fed back to the investigation team, and they went to the shop and found the receipt delivering that electric cement mixer to the address that very morning of the murder.
And the eerie thing about this, on the documentation, it looks like Christoph had actually signed for the cement mixer that was used to build his tomb.
Christoph Borgi had gotten out of bed and signed the receipt for that cement mixer, which was ultimately used in his murder. The trial ran on for 3 weeks. It's impossible not to have some sense of emotion about this, because you put yourself in the position of the victim's family. What would I expect? What would I want?
When the jury were bringing back the verdict, you could have heard a pin drop in that court, because me and the team were on edge, as you can imagine.
Whilst we knew everything inside and out, it was about what the jury were listening to, how they were going to be convinced.
And thankfully the jury came back with guilty.
That trial and the jury's verdict came back faster than the other two, and he was convicted of murder.
The jury saw through his lies, and he was jailed for life with a minimum of 16 years in prison.
We were elated when Wagner got convicted. That was a bit of closure. There was not one that got away for us as an inquiry team. It was the right result.
And at that point you could say, yeah, now we've done our job.
By the time it came to the final trial, the trial of Manuel Wagner, it was 8 years since the murder itself had taken place, which really shows the painstaking levels of the police investigation and all the twists and turns that this case took.
This is down to the persistence of the police officers, who were not prepared to let this man get away with it.
D'un côté, c'était un soulagement de se dire qu'au moins ils avaient été jugés pour ce qu'ils avaient fait, sans les voir non plus, mais d'un autre côté, c'était pas assez. Comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, moi, ce sera jamais assez par rapport à ce qu'ils ont fait.
J'espère juste que ces 3 personnes comprendront ce qu'ils ont fait et qu'ils... Voilà, je sais pas ce qu'ils ont dans leur tête, malheureusement on ne le saura jamais. Mais que... J'espère qu'ils comprendront ce qu'ils ont fait et le mal qu'ils ont fait.
We looked at a number of reasons why these 3 would jointly plan to kill Christoph. And we always kept coming back to the financial side of it, what Kocher was going to lose.
Christoph Borgi was planning to move abroad and paying his wages into Kocher's accounts.
He was a breadwinner, was Christoph. He was bringing in money.
I think Kocher thought that he could manipulate Christoph in the same way that he manipulated Wagner and Bendu by taking their money. And when Kocher realised that Christoph wanted out, that was the trigger point for him killing him.
They decided to turn the kitchen into a kill room. Kocher was the orchestrator, but they were all involved in it.
What he said went. If he said, we'll kill him, then I'll have to kill him.
But what we didn't know is the main reason Sebastian Bendu came forward. council called it the beating heart underneath the floorboards, which I get. I mean, he was living feet from his friend's body. He was still living in the kitchen on a day-to-day basis, and it was messing with his head. And when they fled to Scotland, Bendu's heard a conversation where Wagner and Kocher are talking about him. He's considered to be the weakest link of that chain of three. So that's the real reason why Bendu came forward. He thought he was next in line for the same treatment because he was wobbling with his mental health and his weakness.
We're allowed back in the property to get the remainder of our items. It was scary as soon as you find out that your housemates are murderers and that you stayed with them and that their victim was on the property the entire time. I think the entire experience was eye-opening in the very worst way. Are you okay? You're shaking.
We never went back to the house. We never lived in there again after that. We stayed well away from it.
Do you know, all of the inquiries and all of the background and the history I delved into around Christoph, there was never a bad word said about him. There was, he never harmed anybody. He never mistrusted anybody.
Such a nice lad, such a quiet, happy lad. And you think to yourself, what did that poor lad do to deserve anything like that? He just wanted to be happy and just live a normal life.
There was a service in Liverpool Cathedral for him. So I went over. There was ladies there that worked with him, and they said they couldn't believe what had happened to him. And to think that his friends, his so-called friends, could have done it to him. I was horrified because everybody thought he was such a nice young man. And he was a nice young man.
It was difficult for the family because I suppose for them, they'd always imagined that one day Christoph would just reappear and, they'd get to see him again. There's that photograph that the family gave of him standing there with his glasses and the countryside behind, and all you can see is loss, unfulfilled potential, who he would have gone on to be.
Pour moi, il aurait continué à voyager. Il avait plein de projets, je te dis, il se serait marié peut-être, il aurait eu des enfants.
Ça aurait été super qu'il puisse rencontrer son premier neveu, donc le fils de Noël, le premier qui est né, et moi qui suis devenue maman plus tard, de savoir qu'il aurait pu être aussi tonton pour mon fils. Donc il y avait plein de belles choses comme ça en fait qu'il aurait pu vivre.
Je pense qu'il y a énormément de choses qu'il a ratées, mais je pense qu'il serait fier d'être là aujourd'hui ou de ce qu'on a fait sans lui.
There's certain things that stick with you, and Christoph's murder is one of them. It was the brutal nature in which he was attacked, how he was disposed of, the arrogance of the attempted cover-up.
Christoph was just living his life, and unfortunately, due to chance and circumstance, his life collided with those of Kocher, Bendu and Wagner.
Ils ont vendu, je pense, ou détruit, ou je sais pas ce qu'ils en ont fait, mais fallait pas laisser de traces. Ils essayaient de faire croire à cette disparition volontaire, je pense. On n'a rien. On n'a pas d'album photo, pas d'objet personnel. On n'a même pas ses lunettes. On n'a rien, quoi. On n'a rien de Christophe. On sait. Mais nous, on s'en souvient. C'est l'essentiel.
De garder en mémoire justement son côté foufou, de garder le positif de ce qu'il a pu nous apporter.
Le décès de mon frère, c'est pas un décès normal. Donc il a été assassiné et ça m'a beaucoup affecté, ça affecte ma vie.
Pour moi, ces 3 personnes, elles auront à vie une pancarte autour du cou pour me dire ce qu'elles ont pu faire, le mal qu'elles ont pu apporter dans une famille. Des fois, je croise des gens dans la rue et juste une veste, une couleur ou une personne qui lui ressemble. On se retourne et on dit il est là, et en fait non.
There's no happy ending to this for anybody, particularly the Borgi family. The best that you can say for them is that they've got some closure and that 3 people are serving life sentences, for having committed this horrendous act. So, life moves on, but it'll stay with us for the rest of our days, and that's why it's important the story was told.